Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The end result of figurative interpretation, taʻwīl. Before going through this, we will look what universal rule is. In the year 606, according to Islamic calendar, and 1209, according to solar calendar, 54 years before the birth of Ibn Taymiyya, the great Persian Ash'ari theologian Fakhruddin Razi passed away, leaving behind a massive body of writings. Many of these writings were theological tracts aimed specifically at buttressing the position of the more textually conservative Ash'ari school of theology against the more rationalistically inclined Mu'tazila. In one of his more influential theological treatises, Asas al-Taqdis, al-Razi enunciates a so-called universal rule, Qanun-e-Kulli, a plea from Ash'ari theologians for a truce in the ongoing battle between reason and revelation. By al-Razi's time, this universal rule had won the approval of the majority of his Ash'ari colleagues, whose doctrine was steadily becoming the standard formulation of Islamic belief, expressed in rationalistic terms throughout much of the Islamic world. The universal rule, as paraphrased by Ibn Taymiyyah at the beginning of the Dar al-Tarud, states: if scriptural and rational indications or revelation and reason, or the obvious outward meaning of the revealed text and the definitive conclusions of rational thought, or other ways of phrasing it, are in conflict, then either, number one, they must both be accepted, which is impossible, as this would violate the law of non-contradiction, claiming both P and not P. Second, they must both be rejected, which is also impossible, as this would violate the law of the excluded middle, claiming neither P nor not P. Or third, precedence must be given to revelation, which is impossible, since revelation is grounded in reason. Such that if we were to give priority to the former over the later, that is revelation over reason, this would amount to a rejection of both reason and by extension that which is grounded in reason, namely revelation. One must therefore, number 4, give precedence to reason over revelation, then either interpret revelation figuratively to accord with reason, taʻwīl, or negate the apparent meaning of revelation but refrain from assigning it to a definite particular metaphorical meaning, tafwīz. Ibn Taymiyyah cites an alternative formulation of this rule given by al-Razi in another work, Nihayat al-Uqul fi Dirayat al-Usul, in which al-Razi adds a significant detail central to Ibn Taymiyyah's overall concern in the Dar, namely that the truth of revelation can be established only through rational means, for it is only through reason that we can establish the existence of the Creator and know the authenticity of revelation. Ibn Taymiyyah laments that al-Razi and his followers have made this into a universal rule for interpreting revelation as it relates to God's attributes and other issues in which they deem reason to be in contradiction with what Scripture affirms. Some of them, including al-Razi himself, add to this the notion that scriptural indicants, adilla sam'iyya, are in fact inherently incapable of engendering certainty and therefore cannot be relied upon in matters of definitive knowledge. Ibn Taymiyyah remarks that others before them had already articulated this universal rule, such as Al-Ghazali, who employed it in his short treatise Qanun at-taʻwīl to answer questions posed to him by some of his students, such as Abu Bakr al-Arabi. Ibn al-Arabi in turn articulated an alternative formulation of the rule in a lengthy work of the same title. So Abu Bakr al-Arabi is not Ibn Arabi, basing himself on the method followed by al-Ghazali's teacher al-Juwayni. And those before him, such as al-Baqilani, in sum, Ibn Taymiyyah explains, every school of thought has established for itself an analogous rule. They take as true and objective knowledge what they deem to know on the basis of reason. Then they subordinate revelation to this alleged knowledge and reinterpret it accordingly. Such reinterpretation of revelation as prescribed by the universal rule has conventionally been carried out in one of two ways: through, number 1, figurative interpretation or taʻwīl, which is normally defined as assigning to a revealed text a meaning other than its overt or obvious zahir sense in accordance with the conclusion reached through reason; or through, number 2, suspension of meaning or tafwīz, normally defined as declaring the obvious meaning of a text invalid but refraining from providing any specific alternative interpretation, consigning tafwīz, its true meaning, to God instead. Ibn Taymiyyah subsumes both taʻwīl and tafwīz under a larger dichotomy composed of what he refers to as alteration of meaning, tabdil on the one hand, and presumption of ignorance and misguidance, tajheel and tazleel on the other. Tabdil in turn comprises two subvarieties. Number one, wahm and takhil, and number second, tahrif and taʻwīl. The first method of alteration of meaning, that of wahm and takhil, presupposes revelation to consist mainly of images and metaphors that by design do not correspond to the actual reality of metaphysical matters, such as the nature of God, angels, and other unseen realities, or the eschatological realities of heaven and hell. Rather, according to this view, revelation purposely induces men to conceive of God as consisting of an enormous body, to believe in the literal resurrection of bodies after death, physical rewards and punishments in the hereafter, and so on, as it is in the more moral interest, maslaha, of the common people to be addressed in such a way. Indeed, it is only in this manner that they can successfully be called to religion, and that their ultimate otherworldly benefit, which is consequent upon their acceptance of religion, can be assured. Among others, Ibn Taymiyyah faults Ibn Sina for endorsing this kind of tabdil, alteration of meaning, in his Adahawiyah. The second method of altering of meaning, that of tahrif and taʻwīl, considers that those who were sent with revelation, such as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, did not intend their respective audiences to believe anything other than what is true in and of itself. However, what is true in and of itself is precisely that which we came to know through the use of our reason, not necessarily what is suggested by a straightforward reading of the revealed text. We must then proceed to make various figurative interpretations, tawilat, of the text in accordance with what we believe our reason has established as true. Such interpretations, according to Ibn Taymiyyah, typically involve interpreting words in ways that fall outside conventional usage, ikhraj al-lughat an tariqat al-ma'ruf, and drawing on far-fetched figures of speech and unlikely metaphors, gharaib al-majazat wal-isti'arat. If the method of wahm and takhil marks the philosopher's approach to revelation, then that of tahrif and taʻwīl represents the choice method of the later mutakallimun, who engaged in making taʻwīl of the text on the basis of putatively rational considerations. Whereas both methods of tabdil, or alteration of meaning, presume that the revealed text possesses a true meaning underneath their overt or literal sense, a meaning known by the bearer of revelation, the prophet, and accessible to those possessing the requisite rational capacities, the approach that Ibn Taymiyyah refers to as tajheel and taʻwīl posits a revelation that is partly incomprehensible. The advocates of this approach concede that certain verses bear meanings other than those most naturally understood from them, tukhalifu madlulaha al-mafhum minha, but hold that these true meanings are known to God alone. By consequence, the meaning of such verses are not even known to the Prophet, or by extension to any of the companions or successors, let alone to later generations of Muslim scholars and common people. Those adopting this approach thus practice tafwīz by consigning the true meaning of such verses to God, believing this to have been the way of the pious forebearers, as-salaf as-salih. Others maintain that the Prophet himself knew the true meanings of such verses, but that he purposely refrained from clarifying them to the community. Rather, he left it for later scholars to convey true meaning of these verses and to explicate them on the basis of rational arguments, born of their efforts in the science of non-literal or figurative interpretations, that is taʻwīl. However, given that the Prophet was commissioned to clarify the meaning of revelation to everyone so that they might be rightly guided, his failure to do so would for Ibn Taymiyyah constitute a positive act of misguidance, hence tazleel. The end result of figurative interpretation, taʻwīl. I have made frequent mention of the notion of a conflict between reason and revelation, specifically with respect to what each allegedly says regarding the nature of God. I have also indicated that the claim of conflict typically takes the form of an assertion that revelation, take in its obvious sense, seems to affirm of God certain characteristics that reason has judged cannot be properly ascribed to him. As doing so, reason is held to have determined would result in either, number one, violating one or more premises of a rational argument meant to prove the existence of God or the plausibility of authentic revelation. Second, likening God to created things in a manner that would compromise his unique divinity, a phenomenon known as tashbih, likening, or more technically, assimilationism. The universal rule dictates that any such conflict be decided in favor of reason and that revelation be reinterpreted accordingly. But before taking up the details of Ibn Taymiyya's attempt to refute the universal rule, we must first get a clearer picture of what exactly is at stake for him in the alleged conflict between reason and revelation. What, in other words, did Ibn Taymiyyah find so odious about interpreting revelation through taʻwīl that he felt obliged to write 10 volumes of refutation of the universal rule? We can answer this question by considering Ibn Taymiyyah's portrayal of the process and the inevitable result of increasingly wanton forms of textual reinterpretation. One of the main motivations for denying certain of God's attributes or the divine attributes in general is, as previously mentioned, to avoid tashbih or likening God to created things. An argument typical of this kind is the one made by the late 4th or 10th century Persian Ismaili, Batini missionary and Neoplatonic philosopher Abu Yaqub al-Sijistani, executed in 971. In his work Al-Aqalid al-Malakutiya, this is the very type of argument by which, in Ibn Taymiyyah's assessment, as-Sijistani and other extreme negationists, Nufa, are able to get the better of the various groups that fall along the spectrum from the very slight negation of the early Asharis through the Mu'tazila and on the more comprehensive and systematic negationism of the philosophers. They are able to do this, he explains, because all such groups have concurred with the full-fledged negationists such as Batini on the legitimacy and principle of making figurative interpretation taʻwīl of the revealed text by conceding to them the necessity of negating what is called tashbih of any kind whatsoever. In this manner, any group that affirms any of the divine names or attributes such as the living, Al-Hayy, the omniscient, Al-Alim, the omnipotent, Al-Qadir, and so on, is confuted by the claim that all such predications equally and ultimately entail assimilation, that is tashbih. How is this so? The negationist Ibn Taymiyyah explains, contends that the class of living things and the class of existent things each admit of a twofold logical division into that which is eternal Qadim and that which is originated in time Muhaddas. The fact that the basis of division, Mawrid al-Taqsim, is shared between the two categories entails a kind of composition, tarqib, which constitutes for the negationist a particularly pernicious form of assimilation, namely that of corporealism, tajsim. It entails assimilation in a more general sense, since according to the argument, if what is eternal God and what is temporal originated the universe are said both are to be existent, then they are similar to each other. Ishtabaha, insofar as they are both subsumed under the nominatum of the term existence. Ishtiraq fi musamma al wujud. A fact that inexorably amounts to assimilationism, tashbih, and if it be further held that say one of the two existing entities, namely God, is also characterized by the fact of being necessary by virtue of itself, wajib bin nafsihi, then this entity shares with the other non-necessary entity in the nominatum of the term existence, musamma al wujud, yet is simultaneously distinct from it by virtue of its necessity. Furthermore, that aspect in which it resembles the non-necessary entity, namely existence, is distinguished from that aspect in which it differs from that entity, namely its necessity. This leads to the conclusion that the necessary by virtue of itself, al-wajib bin nafsihi, is composed of both that in which it shares with the other entity, existence, and that which makes it distinct, its unique necessity. But we're told reason has determined that whatever is composed, murakkab in any form, is of necessity, temporarily originated, muhaddas, rather than eternal qadim, contingent, mumkin, rather than necessary, wajib. The deleterious result of God's essence being composed of two parts, existence and necessity, is said to stem from the fact that such a composed entity would be dependent on, in need of each of its parts, muftakir ila juz'ihi. Now, since a thing's part is necessarily other than the thing itself, the argument continues, it follows that the necessarily existent would be dependent on muftakir ila, something other than itself, but that which depends for its existence on something other than itself cannot simultaneously be held to be necessary by virtue of itself, wajib bin nafsihi, enjoying inherent necessity through nothing more than or other than its own self. It follows therefore that if God is truly God by virtue of his self-necessary, beginninglessly eternal existence, then he must be entirely and utterly simple, basit, and in no manner composed, even if such composition be merely a matter of his possessing an entity that is qualified by attributes, and it bears repeating that one of the attributes negated in this argument is the very attribute of existence itself. In this manner, Ibn Taymiyyah concludes the extreme negationist is able to drag whoever has conceded to him these invalid starting principles to an outright negation of the necessarily existent, whose factual existence is known by rational necessity to every reasonable individual. The Bhattani loses in the end, however, for he has brought upon himself the rather serious objection that if, in his desperate attempt to escape assimilationism, he holds that God is, say, neither existent nor living, as created entities are also said to be existent and living, then he has not escaped assimilationism at all. Rather, he has fallen into an even more egregious form of it. For now, he has likened God not to any contingent, albeit existent thing, but to that which is positively non existent. If he then attempts to skirt this dilemma by claiming that God is neither existent nor non existent, then he faces the unanswerable objection that you have established in logic that for any two identical propositions that differ only in affirmation and negation, it necessarily follows that if one of them is true, then the other is false. Thus, if it is true that he exists, then it is false that he does not exist, and vice versa. In accordance with the law of the excluded middle, there is no escape from the fact that one or the other of these propositions must be the case. Pushed hopelessly into a corner, the Bhattani's final recourse is to declare, I do not affirm any of the foregoing propositions. I do not affirm the proposition he is existent, nor the proposition he is non existent. Nor the proposition he is non existent, nor the proposition he is not non existent. This Ibn Taymiyyah concludes is the ultimate position of the atheist's Malahida. By violating the most elementary laws of logic, here the law of the excluded middle, such a person has fallen into more serious quandary than the one from which he was attempted to escape. With regard to assimilationism, moreover, he has sought to escape likening God to any existent or non existent thing by, in the end, likening him not merely to what is possible but non existent, such as unicorn, but even worse to what is logically inconceivable and utterly devoid of even purely mental reality, such as a four sided triangle. Not only does that which is neither existent nor non existent have no ontological reality whatsoever, but it is not even logically conceivable and is thus a worst thing to be likened to than something that is at least conceivable, even if predicated not to exist. The foregoing then is an example of a denial of some or all of the attributes affirmed of God in revelation on the basis of a rational argument preferred in order to avoid assimilationism, taşbih at all costs. But this denial ultimately falls apart because it violates the most elementary laws of logic, thus resulting in the worst kind of assimilationism possible, namely likening God to what is both ontologically impossible and logically inconceivable. Such arguments, according to Ibn Taymiyyah, are typical of those put forth by the various groups of negationists, all of whom concede the concede the theoretical possibility of a bona fide contradiction between reason and a plain sense reading of a revelation. Number second, concur that in the event of such a contradiction, reason must be given priority over revelation. And number third, proceed to reinterpret the obvious sense of revelation, that sense which conflicts with their allegedly unimpeachable rational arguments and conclusions through various degrees of metaphorical interpretation. This process of metaphorical interpretation continues until eventually the texts of the revelation are eviscerated of any meaning whatsoever and denied all possibility of conveying any factual propositional content about God. They hereafter are any other of a host of metaphysical or unseen gab realities. This, in short, is what Ibn Taymiyyah sees as the inescapable outcome of a consistent and rigorous application of the universal rule, and the taʻwīl it prescribes as a means of accommodating revelation to the putative rational objections raised against discrete elements of its overt content. Alhamdulillah. If such negationism is the result of a consistent application of reason, then we may ask, is there any alternative other than to interpret metaphorically through taʻwīl or neutralizing through tafīz the problematic passage of scripture if we seek to safeguard the rational integrity and to a large extent therefore the plausibility of revelation? Ibn Taymiyyah answers this question about the possibility of an alternative in the affirmative, and in fact dedicates the bulk of the Daratar or 10 volumes to demonstrating that all the alleged rational objections brought to bear against a straightforward reading of revelation fall apart on purely rational grounds. What is called reason gradually breaks down as we move further away from the true, natural, innate, pure reason endorsed by revelation and exemplified by the Salaf. Ibn Taymiyyah begins his case with the observation that the principle according to which a person should give precedence to the deliverances of his own rational faculty over the obvious meaning of the revealed text is not governed by universally applicable rule. This is so because Kalam, theologians and philosophers who regularly dispute with one another over what they call rational knowledge often make opposite truth claims on the basis of identical appeals to rational necessity or the results of discursive inference. For instance, both those who negate some of the divine attributes and the divine decree, Ibn Taymiyyah singles out the Mu'tazila and those of the Shia who followed them on the one hand, and those who affirm the divine attributes and decree on the other claim to do so on the basis of allegedly conclusive rational arguments. Moreover, And this is a cardinal tenet of Ibn Taymiyyah doctrine on reason and revelation. The farther a school of thought is from the Sunnah, the greater the internal disagreement among its adherents concerning what the dictates of reason are. This point is essential for Ibn Taymiyyah. Reason and revelation coincide in a fundamental sense. As a result, the more a faction moves away from what reason and revelation essentially overlap in affirming, the more it experiences internal decision, divergences of opinion, and incoherence poorly in terms of uh, rational thought, in addition to finding itself at increasingly greater odds with revelation. In other words, either one is fully in line with both pure reason and an essentially straightforward reading of authenticated revelation, or one drifts away from both reason and from revelation simultaneously. In the latter case, one not only ends up contradicting revelation and seeking to explain it away through an increasingly liberal use of the principle of taʻwīl, but also falls prey at the same time to increasingly intractable rational contradictions, divergences, and improbabilities. This principle can best be illustrated in the form of the Taymiyan pyramid, uncovered in the introduction and reproduced on the following page. Through which that point of unity, clarity, and certainty, yaqeen, at which the testimony of sound reason and that of authentic revelation are fully concordant according to the pyramid. The Mu'tazila, for example, exhibit greater internal discord than the Asharis and other affirmationists among the Mutakallimun, as evidenced by the extent of disagreement between the Mu'tazili school of Basra and that of Baghdad, to adherents of the former. As for the philosophers, Ibn Taymiyyah remarks it is almost impossible to find anything upon which they collectively agree. In point of fact, their internal divergences are greater than those that separate the distinct religious communities of Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Indeed, he argues that philosopher differences with regard to astronomy alone, which is a computational mathematical subject that figures among the most objective and accurate of their sciences, are greater than the differences among any of the various sects of Muslims. As for metaphysics, the leading philosophers themselves concede their inability to reach any kind of certitude regarding it whatsoever. Rather, their discourse on metaphysical matters amounts to no more than weighing various probabilities and hazarding judgments of likelihood and probability. To underline the specious nature of much of Kalam discourse, Ibn Taymiyyah appeals to several of the major rationalists, Nuzzar, themselves who testified to the futility of their lifelong efforts to attain theological certainty through the practice of dialectical theology. The following two lines by Ash-Shahrastani, for instance, emphasize how such thinkers often reach only a state of confusion and perplexity. I have made the rounds of the gatherings of the learned, Mahid, and cast my eyes upon the hearts of erudition, Ma'alim. Yet never did I see but men perplexed with their chins in their hands, on gnashing their teeth in regret. Ibn Taymiyyah also cites three lines of a poetry to a similar effect from a work of Ar-Razi, in which Ibn Taymiyyah refers to Aqsam al-Lazat. This passage reads, Entanglement, the acme of mind's pursuit. Most human endeavor is but straying. Our souls are estranged from our bodies. The yield of our world, but harm and bane. All we have gained from a lifelong research is but collecting quotations and sayings. Ibn Taymiyyah continues citing from the same work, while Ar-Razi states in a manner reminiscent of Al-Ghazali in Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal that he has contemplated the methods of both the philosophers and Mutakallimun and has found neither to be of any ultimate benefit. Rather, he has found that the most reliable way is that of the Quran, which affirms the divine attributes and verses as the most merciful has settled upon the throne, Surah Taha verse 5. To him ascends the goodly word and he raised up righteous steeds, Surah 5 verse 10. Yet it also contains verses that negate any notion of commensurability or essential comparability between God and creation. In Surah Shura verse 11, there is none like unto him. They encompass him not in knowledge, Surah Taha verse 110, and have knowledge of anything like unto him, Surah Maryam verse 65. Ibn Taymiyyah concludes by quoting Ar-Razi's statement that whoever experiences what I have experienced will come to know what I have come to know. Ibn Taymiyyah also cites 9 lines of similar import from Ibn Abi al-Hadid, who died in 1258, one of the foremost Shia thinkers with Mu'tazili and philosophical leanings. He also points out that the illustrious later-day Ashari theologian and legal scholar Saifuddin al-Amidi, in most of his books, suspends judgment on many of the central issues of theology, declaring the arguments of various sects spurious but ultimately remaining perplexed and unable to take a position himself. Similarly, the celebrated 13th century logician and judge of Persian origin, Afdal ad-Din al-Khunaji, best known for his logical treatise Kashf al-Asrar an Ghawamid al-Afkar, was reported to have said on his deathbed, I die having learned nothing but that the contingent is dependent on the impossible. Al-Mumkin muftakir ila al-Mumtanyah. Yet dependence, iftiqar, is a negative property, thus I die having learned nothing at all. Indeed, Ibn Taymiyyah remarks even Al Ghazali, despite his tremendous intelligence and pious devotion, his knowledge of discursive theology and philosophy, and his traveling the Sufi path of asceticism and spiritual discipline, nonetheless ended up suspending judgment on such matters and referred in the final analysis to the method of private intuition and spiritual unveiling. Nevertheless, he reports Al Ghazali returned to the way of the people of Hadith at the end of his life and upon his bed was occupied with the study of Al Bukhari's Sahih collection of authentic prophetic reports. Another result of the futility of the rational methods used in discursive theology, in Ibn Taymiyyah's view, is that Al Ghazali refuted the methods and arguments of the philosophers, but did not affirm any particular method of his own. Rather, Al Ghazali admits in his famous work Tuhfat al Falasifa, I hold them to the full and undesirable consequences of the doctrine, by arguing at times from the position of the Mu'tazila, at times from the position of the Karamiyya, at other times from the position of those who suspend judgment. Al Waqifa, yet I refrain from defending any particular position myself. Ibn Taymiyyah also informs us that a group of leading mutakallimun used to speak of the equivalence of proofs, tukafala al-adilla, claiming that the various arguments advanced to prove a particular point cancelled one another out, making it impossible to determine on rational grounds truth from falsehood with respect to the given question. Ibn Taymiyyah relates that it was reported to him that a certain Ibn Wasil al-Hamawi, who had studied with the foremost authority of his time in the fields of discursive theology and philosophy, used to say, I lie in bed at night, pull the covers over my eyes, and weigh the arguments of this group and of that group until morning comes with neither position having proved to be the stronger one. Ibn Taymiyyah contrasts the drastic agnostic pessimism expressed in numerous quotations above with what he describes as the calm assuredness of those who know and who cling resolutely to the original, pristine, orthodox, scripturally revealed prophetic method. Such men are thoroughly familiar both with this method and the doctrines that are said to be in contradiction with revelation, such as the claim of the createdness of the Quran or the purely abstract or symbolic nature of the divine attributes. Therefore, they can easily recognize the invalidity of such doctrines by virtue of the deliverances of what Ibn Taymiyyah calls pure natural reason, which is always found to be in full conformity with what is affirmed by authentic revelation. However, those who delve into the elements of philosophy and discursive theology that are said to contradict revelation but without possessing full knowledge of the contents and the consequence of the revealed text or the doctrines alleged to be at odds with them are unable to arrive at any certain knowledge with confidence. Instead, they are up in confusion and perplexity. The most preeminent of them are even at a loss to furnish conclusive arguments for the existence of the Creator himself, a topic of central concern to Ibn Taymiyyah and the Dar, and one that merits a study of his own. Some, he says, and are perplexed like Ar-Razi, while others like Ahmadi are forced to suspend judgment on the matter. Indeed, such thinkers often mention numerous positions held by different schools, claiming that truth lies in one or the other of them, though they cannot necessarily determine which one. Yet all the various positions mentioned, Ibn Taymiyyah declares confidently, can in fact be shown to be false and without rational foundation on the basis of pure natural reason.